Call a meeting to order. The TCC meeting for June 21st. Start with self-introductions, starting to my left this time.
Larry Thies, City of Orinda, representing SWAT.
Kevin Rohani, City of Oakley.
Jerry Fay, Contra Costa County.
Steve Kersavan, the City of Brentwood.
Sean Letchbeth, County Connection.
Eileen Hernandez, BART.
Eric Hughes, City of Pleasant Hill and Transpac.
Paul Reinders, City of Pittsburgh.
James Hincamp, City of Lafayette, and SWAT.
Leah Greenblatt with Tech.
Lori Reese Brown, City of Richmond.
John Cunningham, Contra Costa County.
And in the audience,
Bruce Olson, Mike East Bay.
Celestine Doe, BART. Stephanie Hu, Contra Costa Transportation Authority staff.
Matt Kelly, CCTA staff. Aaron Bird, Caltrans.
all right, welcome all. Oh, and Yvette from El Cerrito just joined us. And Brad Beck from CCTA staff just joined us as well, just for the record. All right, moving on. Public comments. I do have one card from Bruce Olson from Bike East Bay. Come on up. Okay. Oh, that's right. Okay. All right. Do I have any public comments from anybody else? And all right, moving on. The election of chair and vice chair. Well, it's that time of the year, so it's my time to step down. And unfortunately, the vice chair, who's Andy Dillard with Town of Danville, he's not here today. And so I think Stephanie contacted, both Stephanie and Andy actually contacted Paul Lander as the new vice chair. Do you accept, Paul?
Yes, certainly.
I guess it's Transplant's turn this time for vice chair. So I guess we need a motion, right? Do we need a motion? And okay. Do I have a motion for bumping?
I'll move Paul. Or is it Paul that we nominate, or East County, or?
I guess Andy going to be for chair, and then Paul from East County going to be for vice chair.
That's what I move.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll move on to the next item, which is approval of summary of actions. All those that were here last time, do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Anything?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? So moved, or passed. Thank you. The next item is consent calendar, attendance log for the February 15th meeting. Can I have a motion for that? Motion to approve the attendance log?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that'll pass. And then funding summary. Stephanie?
The funding summary is on the consent calendar.
We can just move.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's a consent item.
Yeah, so number 3, project monitoring.
That's just for information.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to the regular agenda items. Item 3, Stephanie, project monitoring, the STIP projects, status and update.
Yeah. So this is my monthly or usual item for the project monitoring. This time there's a couple of additional attachments for your information. I just would like to perhaps go through each one of them kind of quickly and maybe emphasize a couple of them. So attachment A is for the STIP projects. The 2018 STIP was approved in March. You may recall that some of you sat on the committee to evaluate our STIP projects for Contra Costa, and you'll see the 3 that we nominated from our county is now. Those 3 projects are now on the list in attachment A. So they were 684 construction of phase 3 and stuff for operational improvements for design, and the I-80 Central phase 2 for right-of-way. So those are now in the table for monitoring since they were formally approved in the 2018 STIP. And then for attachment B is your, hopefully they should look familiar. They're the OBAG 2 OBAG projects, and now it's the second cycle, so these are the projects that we program as part of our OBAG 2 process that we've completed last year. So again, I think this was on the agenda last time, so please just review it and make sure there's not any error or surprises. I know MTC moved some of your projects outward or to a later year without really informing us, so these should be current. So if you see anything that you feel like it's wrong or you're surprised, please talk to me or Brad or email us or call us afterwards if you see something that's not what you thought, where your project should be. So yeah, again, you should expect more emails from me this year and in the coming years. I think last year of OBAG 1 was kind of quiet because we didn't have that many projects left over. So now OBAG 2 has started. You will be hearing from me more again for monitoring and just bugging you about whether or not you guys are meeting all your milestone dates for your projects. Okay, and then attachment C is the ATP, Active Transportation Program projects. There are a couple that are programmed in the coming fiscal year. So again, I'll be reaching out to those project sponsors for updates. And then attachment D, this is a new report that will be monitoring Highway Bridge Program and the Highway Safety Improvements Program. This is, we're doing this per the request of MTC. There's some heightened interest at the CTC level about these two programs and whether or not these projects are being delivered on time. And a couple of our agencies have had to go to the CTC to kind of address the commission on why things were delayed and such. So as a result of that, MTC has asked all of the CMAs to start monitoring these two programs. So now we've attached or included in this agenda item, and will be monitored monthly from now on. Attachment E is our inactive obligation projects list. You may notice that you're getting MTC staff emails these days regarding inactive obligation project list. It used to come from me only, but now, again, MTC has stepped up to really crack down on people trying, if there's delay in invoicing. So they are now sending emails to you all directly, so you will not see that particular email from me because I don't want to bombard your inbox. And then lastly, I just wanted to also highlight attachment F. It's a memo from MTC talking about the 18-19 annual obligation plan, which I'm working on with MTC staff in the next few weeks. I think there's just only a handful of projects that are from Contra Costa that are on the 18-19 plan. So I'll be reaching out to your SPOCs for that effort. But this is a policy that they're proposing. I wanted to note a few things. First, in the past, when we work on the obligation plan, I normally was the one who reached out to you all and asked you whether or not you're ready to be on a particular year's plan, and you commit to yes or no. But they would like now to have the SPOC be formally requesting to be on the plan by emailing me and MTC, sort of as an indication of your commitment to deliver your project under that plan. So that's a new proposed policy. And then second, there's some HSIP deadlines that were updated. And the third thing that was of note is there are some consequences of missing ATP and SB1 reporting deadlines, which are done every ATP is twice a year, and then SB1 is twice a year, I think, to submit your project list and once for your expenditure progress reports. So consequences of missing those deadlines would be affecting your OBAG funds. They are threatening to push your OBAG projects further back. So that's a new policy they're suggesting. And then the following two that I'm sharing, that I'm about to share, we feel like we should push back a little bit. This is a proposed plan, and they are looking for comments. So there are two that we thought would be a little bit hard to meet. The first one is for deadline of CTC obligation by January 31st. So that affects ATP and STIP funding. For those who have had those fundings in the past, you have to allocate to the CTC Commission. And the package that goes to this to the Caltrans staff to agendize the item usually takes a couple of months. So we're asking to obligate funds by January 31st, which means you need to go to the January CTC meeting, which means you need to submit all your paperwork by late November or early December. We just feel like that might be a little bit too difficult for the locals and as well as ourselves, I guess, to meet. So we're hoping to ask to change the rule to perhaps request for obligation by January 31st, meaning make the March CTC meeting. The second thing that was also a little bit too harsh, I guess in our opinion, is the CTC extensions request. So projects who are asking for CTC extensions for like ATP funding or STIP, there's some implication of if you ask for these extensions, you may have your OBAG funds pushed back. So these two that I just mentioned, we're thinking about emailing or sending out comments to MTC staff to hopefully loosen up that rule a little bit because it's a little bit too hard to comply. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to take a look at the memo. If there are anything that you guys see is too harsh or you feel like it's not reasonable, please email me so I can relay your comments to MTC staff. And again, this is a draft. But I think the underlying tone of this is to meet the deadlines that you are committed to do when you put a project on a certain year's obligation plan. And they are really using the OBAG funding as sort of the consequence for missing deadlines. So that's all I have. I will be open to questions if you guys have any.
Questions, comments? All right, thank you, Stephanie. We'll move on to the next item. The final 2018 countywide bike and ped plan. Brad Beck. Oh, listen to the presentation and then take the.
Good afternoon, TCC members. That's you. What?
Oh, no, I was waiting for them to go. The mic sounded off.
Check, check, check. There it goes. Excuse me. The microphones can be very sensitive. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brad Beck. I'm a senior transportation planner at the Authority, and I'm here to present the proposed final countywide bicycle and pedestrian plan, the 2018 update. I'm hoping to get your endorsement and any comments that you might have about what we've done and what's in the plan. So I'll start right in. Right here's where we are. We're at the final step, the final plan and the environmental clearance process. How did we get here? So we did a lot of work trying to reach out to the public and to local agencies during this process. We had an online survey, we had interactive maps, we went out to the RTPC tax to discuss potential options. These are the words that we heard from our online survey. You can see bike and walking, better, safer. A lot of words that showed up from that some 600 some comments that we received. We had these two documents we put out, a strategic white paper, which we took out to the RTPC tax. There it goes again. Wow. We have a state of walking and bicycling in Contra Costa that we
Just use this.
We heard a number of themes. From the public, we heard that they wanted better facilities. They wanted better crosswalks. They wanted separated bikeways. They wanted to close gaps. They also wanted to educate road users. There were a lot of comments about excessive speed and drivers not watching out for people who walk and bicycle. They wanted more bike parking, and they wanted better safe routes to school and safe routes to transit. From the tax, we heard the support for corridor studies, for best practices, keeping them up to date and letting the authority keep them up to date and let you know those changes. People wanted help on dealing with SB 743 and addressing VMT and the role of bicycling and walking in that process, setting short and long-term priorities and getting funding and better ways to fund projects. So we released a draft in March. We had several ways of commenting. We had a new survey online. We had reopened the interactive maps. We had RTPC meetings, and we had a lot of letters and emails we also received. Our deadline was May 25th. We got a few stragglers. We tried to deal with them if we could. We had a very short time period to do it in. So what did we hear? Here are the new words that we got. There were a couple hundred comments that we received on, excuse me, on our interactive website. Bicycle is still prominent. We got a lot of comments on Diablo Road, so you'll see Diablo there from people in Alamo and Danville. We got a lot of really specific comments. These are a couple of them. Yes, a particular stretch of road is dangerous. Continue to work in western Contra Costa, Danville Boulevard, Waterfront Road, Green Valley Road to Diablo Scenic. There are a lot of particular comments that we received. This is an example we saw in from the interactive web map. This is the pedestrian priority web map. We got a couple of comments on improvements there. Places to add. Here are another places that people thought either were bad or needed to be added. There was that one in the middle refers to some trails through the Mount Diablo State Park and down near Morgan Territory Road. So some of the frequently heard comments we got increased the emphasis on pedestrians, that people thought there needed to be more emphasis in the plan on what people who walk need. There was a lot of comment on how does the level of traffic stress approach deal, how does it work? What about contextual design? How do you get projects in limited rights of way and in communities that may not like the idea of a particular kind of facility? Clarifying what the plan's priorities are and addressing equity. We got a number of one-off comments like putting the bike parking discussion in the infrastructure chapter and not in the support chapter, adding rural design standards. Got one comment, don't put a bike lane on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. What is linear regression and elasticity? So we've tried to deal with that. And another one is to work with school districts to try to make walking to school possible. The comment referred to school districts where they have charter schools, and when you send a kid to a charter school, a lot of times the parent is forced to drive their kid there, and there's no way for them to walk or bike to school. So what did we change? In the introduction, we added a section on what are the benefits of walking and bicycling to make it, to convey to the reader why it is that we're going through this plan. We reorganized the strategies into these 7 themes, and we also repeated those themes and organized the implementation chapter according to them. We did a lot of work on pedestrian facilities. We had more information on the existing challenges, on what makes a good pedestrian network, expanded the planning and designing pedestrian facilities chapter with more detail, and we updated the pedestrian priority maps. We added a few areas, including areas that had high concentrations of collisions, and also mapped where all the schools are. And that's a better map of it. It's also in the plan, obviously. In the bicycle facilities chapter, we expanded the definition and reorganized the description of level of traffic stress and gave some examples of what facilities would match which levels of traffic stress, which is one of the requests that we got. We updated the countywide bikeway network, which we got a number of comments on. We updated the countywide analysis of level of traffic stress to reflect those changes, and to make the bicycle chapter a little shorter and a little easier to get through, we moved a lot of the regional level of traffic stress maps to an appendix. And these are the changes. They're not huge. They're just a couple additions and some shifts of the network from one route to another. In the support program section, there were a lot of little changes. We added some information about Safe Route to School, added some new strategies on educating drivers, expanded the discussion of the importance of wayfinding, especially in placemaking and pedestrian districts. We added new considerations for shared dockless bikes and e-bikes and scooters, which we had a number of comments about. And we revised the evaluation section. We expanded the bike share discussion. It's the same section. We expanded the section where we added a section on setting priorities that wasn't really in the initial draft. We added a number of new actions, including collaboration with school districts and a new strategy, a new implementation task to do a pedestrian needs assessment. We had a number of comments asking that the authority, look at the pedestrian needs in Contra Costa County, come up with an estimate of how many new sidewalks and what the cost of that would be, what are the best practices for maintaining and expanding pedestrian facilities. We also updated the cost to reflect project updates. This was a very hard thing to get our handle on, getting the numbers to match. This is different than what's in the draft that you saw, because we went through a lot of checking to make sure we got the numbers correct. So basically, in our appendices of local bicycle and pedestrian projects, we've got about $1.4 billion in current dollars in unfunded bicycle and pedestrian projects. And we think we've got about $172 million. So that's a shortfall of $1.2 billion right now. If we have an estimate of potential new revenues that's in the countywide transportation plan of about $790 million, still leaves a shortfall of $442 million. That's probably not even close to what it really is, because there are a lot of projects that haven't been submitted to us. There will be a lot of projects generated through corridor studies that jurisdictions will work on. For example, the current Iron Horse Trail study that goes from Concord down to the county line in San Ramon, that will probably identify new projects itself. And there are a number of corridor studies that are shown on the bikeway network in San Pablo and Concord, for example, those will also generate new projects which will increase the costs of our estimate of funding need. Yes, I'm getting pretty close to the end. We changed around the best practices. We combined both bicycle and pedestrian best practices into a single appendix and added a new section on contextual design, trying to respond to some of the comments about trying to get bicycle and pedestrian improvements into existing rights-of-way and in keeping with the communities in which they're found. We also redid the local bikeway networks. We got some comments that the maps that were in there were just a little too hard to read. They didn't have enough detail. So we've reorganized them into 7 tiles, and they're focused on different areas: West County, Central County. There are 3 in East County. That's in your handout. There's one around La Miranda and one around San Ramon Valley. We did it at a bigger scale so that we could show the inter-county connections between the jurisdictions, but we also added in some additional detail on the street system in which the facilities would be built. And we're hoping these will be useful to jurisdictions and to the public in understanding the connections among the planned facilities in Contra Costa. And that's the end of my presentation. What I'm looking for today is to hear your comments and get your recommendation to send this to the Planning Committee for approval in July.
Lori.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Lori Reese Brown, City of Richmond. So my question is, can you go back to the budget? Budget table, yes.
You mean this?
Yes. So you mentioned that there's a shortfall of approximately $442 million, and that's a result of projects that you are not anticipating that may come up in the future, that you are kind of estimating that will bring on the shortfall, correct? Did I say that right?
Not quite. Right now,
explain to me what I'm trying to say.
Right now, we've got about $1.4 billion, assuming I've escalated some of the numbers because some of the project estimates are pretty old. That's just the project that you've told us about. Mm-hmm. The project is submitted by Richmond or by Orinda, Brentwood, et cetera. We think that we've got about $172 million in funding that's available right now for those projects. Mm-hmm. So that means that today, in 2018, we've got a shortfall of $1.2 billion. And we estimated that we might have around $790 million in future dollars. It could be through a new measure, could be through SB1, or we didn't know what the amount of revenues will be generated through SB1 when we did the estimate. We didn't have RM3. So it may be that we'll have even more if we can get a new measure or some other additional funding. That still leaves a shortfall. And there are other projects that we don't know about yet that people will identify through other studies. Jurisdictions that don't have a bicycle pedestrian plan will do one, and they'll find new projects. Pittsburgh's doing a plan right now, and I'm sure that they'll identify even more projects through that process.
So will you then go back and amend this section right here, or this cost estimate? If you do find that in the future there are some other identified funding, how would you do that to reflect a more updated plan?
Well, the next time we update the plan, and that is one of the strategies in the plan, is to update this plan periodically. The next time we do it, we'll update the estimate of the cost of the projects that we know about, the amount of funding that's available for those projects, and what potential funding we think might be available in the future. So yeah, we will be updating it.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
I have a
Leah.
few kind of related to this cost funding section. So the slide under the estimated potential revenue, you say you accounted for like maybe another measure X kind of thing. So what percentage of that future measure X is this based on? Like what the ped bike percentage of funding would be? What?
The 790 assumes a certain amount of funding for complete streets, for bicycle and pedestrian, and for safe routes to school. And it doesn't include other funding for other kinds of projects like freeway interchanges or extension of BART further to the east or any of those kinds of projects. Now, some of them may have components, some bicycle pedestrian components included them. For example, the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, that project's $89 million to put in the third eastbound lane into Richmond and to do the bicycle pedestrian Class 1 facility on the north side of I-580 from Castro to the bridge. We don't know how much the bike component is going to be of that. It's a relatively small, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 5%. Staff hasn't broken out, who's in charge of that project, hasn't broken out that cost, so we don't know what it is. Right now, in our CTPL, our Comprehensive Transportation Project List, we have about $1 billion in projects that are not bike ped projects, but have some bicycle or pedestrian component to them. But we don't know how much that is, so we haven't included that into this estimate.
It's not quite getting to my question. So, when we were working on Measure X and Measure J, Measure C was before me, but, there's always this question of what percentage is going to go towards ped bike. And so, if I'm understanding you correctly, there in this handout, you have these, these breakdowns by sections: complete streets, safe routes to school, ped bike and trail facilities. That $279 million on the handout is part of that's composed of what a future measure X might generate, if I'm understanding that correctly. So I'm wondering, what is the percentage of ped bike funding that would be included, or that you base this calculation on?
I still don't quite understand your question. These estimates do come from our Measure X estimate, and Measure X included about $177 million for complete streets and $290.
So if it's the existing Measure X, I think didn't the ped bike fund get like about 5%? Isn't that what?
I can't remember the exact breakdown.
I just didn't understand that part. But what my overall question is, and this is something that came from WICTAC, and I don't think that the comments was sufficiently addressed it, and it had to do with the identification of this pretty considerable shortfall, and that it's a planning document, but we don't really identify any strategies for how we're going to identify new funding to help meet this shortfall. And then, like you were saying earlier, this shortfall is probably underestimated because there's so many projects we don't know about. So I'd like to see the plan include, well, not me, well, yes, me, but WICTAC. I think the nature of our comment was that we wanted to see more planning for how to address the funding shortfall. And in looking at our, the comments, the response to comments, I think one is there's comment number 5, I think it is, and then 72. It's on page 19 of the comments. It just says comment noted. And I'd say that's probably not sufficient enough for what WICTAC was trying to pursue in that comment.
Comment noted. Funding is a perennial problem that goes beyond this particular aspect of the transportation network. We'll see what we can do on. I mean, it's where you get funding from is it's an ongoing problem, and
Well, I think it's interesting, like that you measured that. You mentioned that this future estimate was based on Measure X money, and there were a lot of communities, I'll say especially in West County, that thought that the ped bike component wasn't sufficient. So maybe there could be a discussion in this document, kind of evaluating where there are potential new sources of funding, and a future Measure X could include something like that. I mean, that number of the 790 million could be more if a higher percentage of a future Measure X was put towards these projects.
it is possible, yes. In the CHPL, we have about $8 billion in unfunded projects, and that's unescalated. So it's probably much more than that. And so the pedestrian bicycle safe routes to school component of that is, 12%, something like that, of our estimate. I haven't calculated. I haven't gone through the process of escalating all the dollars.
Well, like in the plan, I copied one of these pages here. I was looking at the strikeout version, but it talks about how this is a funding advocacy document. In the executive summary, it calls it a funding advocacy document. And if we're going to call it that, which is great, I'm not saying don't call it that, but then let's have some more funding advocacy information in the document.
What would you suggest would be, what would make good funding advocacy?
I think like looking at, like what could measure a future Measure X, what could be the range of funding that could occur. That's something that we, the people in the county, have some control over. Or you could be advocating with elected officials on a statewide level, or working, coming up with strategies for improving access to funding with MTC. I mean, I think if we put our creative thinking hat on, we could come up with, a couple paragraphs to include in the document.
I think that's certainly possible. The authority has a lot of, as part of its legislative agenda, has a lot of emphasis on generating funding for the county and for the transportation needs within the county, and we could certainly build on that.
Yeah. That's it for me.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? If not, I don't see any. We'll go to the public comment. Mr. Olson. Bike East Bay.
Feel free to adjust. I'll bang on it real hard. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Thank you. Bruce Olson, Bike East Bay. I have to admit that I'm on the Bicycle Advisory Committee of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And we see only one major problem with this document, and that is it has no teeth. This is not the fault of the CCTA. This is not the fault of staff. This is not the fault of the consultant. Jurisdictions who want to use this document will. Jurisdictions who want to ignore this document will. That's the way things are. Here's an example. Let's say we've got a 2-mile long stretch of very nice arterial street with marked shoulder on both sides. Everything wonderful. 2 miles long. It really gets where you want to go, except there's a 1-block segment in there with no facility for the bicyclist. So those who we are aiming at in this document, the interested but concerned, are going to say, I can't go that way. It's too dangerous. So basically, my analysis, the bicycle community's analysis, is we are abandoning the transportation cyclist in this document and trying to attract the interested but concerned, that is somebody who doesn't currently bicycle. This is good as far as it goes. However, we create these low-stress facilities aimed at people who don't currently bicycle. We're abandoning the transportation cyclists. These people who don't currently bicycle aren't trying to get somewhere. Those guys are called recreationalists. So we are creating a bike plan that is not transportation-oriented, but is recreation-oriented. Well, as I said to start with, the plan has no teeth. So I'm definitely not going to tell you don't say to the CCTA full board, don't adopt it. Definitely adopt it. It's way better than what we had. It's way better than nothing. But we don't expect a whole lot to change because we've adopted this document. And I do want to stress, this is not the fault of staff, not the fault of CCTA, not the fault of the consultant. That's just the way things are. That's something we got to change. But it's not changed in this document. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Other comments from committee?
Comments?
If not, do we have a motion
I have
to?
a comment.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, staff, is it not the purpose of a plan to serve the community? I mean, that's the whole purpose of having a plan, so that it does have teeth, and that it does, as quote unquote, and that it does get to benefit the community and the bicyclists in this case. Just we kept seeing bike as the main theme, you know.
Well, there are different ways to benefit the bicyclist and pedestrian communities for people who walk and bicycle. I didn't spend a lot of time on the implementation chapter. I gave just a very general overview on it, but there are a number of recommendations that would help define new projects, like doing corridor studies, that would focus our efforts on finishing the bikeway network and on building out facilities in areas where it's more likely that people will walk more frequently in the pedestrian priority areas and around schools, which are included in those pedestrian priority areas. The authority is primarily a planning and funding agency. We do some work trying to develop facilities. For example, we're working on getting the McCollum overcrossing of Highway 4 constructed, doing the construction management on that. And we have funded a number of bicycle projects, and the plan helps direct where those funds will go. And there are a number of other things in the strategy section, for example, doing the pedestrian needs assessment that we hope will give the public a better understanding of how much it costs to build out the sidewalks that are needed to get people to walk more frequently and feel more comfortable doing it within Contra Costa. So I think there are ways to do it, but you know, we for the most part, they're not our roads, so we have to work with our partners. We have been working with Bike East Bay, and we'll be working with the county on a particular project we've been talking about to connect the Canal Trail and the Iron Horse Trail. So we're trying to work on multiple levels and trying to encourage more active transportation in the county.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, it was just based on what I heard, and I know how plans get sometimes that they just kind of sit on a shelf. But I wanted to ensure that since we only had the one comment, that we are at least addressing that concern through this plan. So I don't think there's any, I hate to leave it here, but that's where it is.
I don't know, I was going to move something, but.
Well, I was just going to maybe follow up with a question on that. I mean, some of the teeth for the plan is provided by the prioritization criteria that you're recommending, and you're recommending that the Measure J prioritization criteria be used for all projects, ped and bike projects, regardless of funding source. Is that correct?
Well, the plan does note that there will have to be some tweaks because every funding source has its own strings attached and own funding limitations. Like, for example, if your funding is CMAQ funding, federal CMAQ money, you can't do plans. So even if one of the strategies in the plan is to encourage corridor studies, you can't use the CMAQ money to do that. So the plan recognizes that, but it also recognizes that not every project has to be on the countywide bikeway network or within a pedestrian priority. If it's really needed because it addresses a safety issue in that particular location, and that's very, very important. So we have to have some kind of balance, but we tried to add the priority section to give the public a sense of where the priorities for the plan would be.
And following up on that, the CBAC recommended that you add some type of language about medium stress facilities to potentially addressing that comment that we're potentially only doing low stress facilities and not medium stress facilities that fill in that critical gap.
That is accurate, and in fact, it was in response to one of Mr. Olson's comments. But there were other members of the committee who agreed with him on that point. So yes, we did note that it's impossible to do interim improvements to try to address needed improvements, even if they don't get all the way to LTS 1 or 2.
I do. I'd like to move the staff recommendation to approve the proposed final CBPP to the Planning Committee and Authority Board with the addition to the plan of a discussion on the strategies for meeting the funding shortfall, consistent with it being a funding advocacy document as identified in the executive summary.
A second.
Discussion? Kevin? No? Do I have a second?
I second it.
I have a second. All in favor? And opposed? Passes. Off to the board.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, incorporating locally reviewed Plan Bay Area 2040 projections, 2017 land use into the CCTA countywide travel demand forecast model. Matt Kelly is up.
Thank you, Chair. And committee members, as the congestion management agency for Contra Costa, we are required to maintain a travel demand forecasting model and update it periodically to be consistent with MTC's model, as well as the adopted RTP land use, the Plan Bay Area 2040, which was adopted last summer. So late last year, we received those land use forecasts from ABAG MTC and came to you in December to let you know that we were needed to incorporate it, and we needed you to, the jurisdictions, to review the forecasts at the traffic analysis zone level. We get it from MTC at kind of a census tract level, with about 170 zones in Contra Costa, and we disaggregate that to about 1,300 zones within the county, so a much more detailed zonal system, so there's more sensitivity in Contra Costa when running the model. So I'm just here to report back on what we heard from you and where things are at. So we had a review period from January 23rd or 24th, I believe, through the end of March. We received a few comments through that period, and I started, I had been bugging people throughout the period, but kept bugging people and managed to get, actually as of Friday, it says in here 11 comments. We received 12 as of last Friday. We got some comments from Orinda that had gotten lost in the email ether. So we did get comments from 12 jurisdictions, and that status report is on page 5.2 and 5.3 of your packet. And you can see below that, you can see the household and employment numbers for the cities. That's not at the zonal level. Zonal level is much too detailed. As I mentioned, about 1,300 zones for the county. So I just want to go over, for the cities that commented, we were able to incorporate all your comments. For the rest of the cities, we were able to maintain the city level baselines that you see here. So your city remained kind of as it was before the local review, with just some minor adjustments at the zonal level. But just wanted to impress upon you that the zonal detail should be about the same as it was previous to this land use update, so with the projections 2013. If you didn't comment, basically the distribution of jobs and households amongst your zones is the same, but with adjustments based on the changes between P2013 and P2017. So if 10% of the jobs in your community were in these, 2 or 3 downtown zones, that percentage of jobs are still there. But if the jobs between the two sets of projections increased by 5%, then you'll see that same increment of growth in those zones. So the people who didn't comment won't see a whole lot of changes in the distribution, but you will see the growth increment from the change in between projections 2013 and 2017. The folks that actually provided us detail at the zonal level will see those changes reflected in the updated model. So if you didn't comment and you have concerns, I think, when we're doing kind of regional studies, the countywide plan, analysis of major projects around the county, you won't see an impact, based on the fact that you did not comment. Now, when it comes down to doing a traffic study in your city, or a specific plan, or kind of a major housing development, you may want to take a closer look at the time when you're doing that traffic study and make sure that you're comfortable with the allocations at the zonal level. And, when you do that study, you can make adjustments to the model using your consultants. So I want to impress upon you that there are still options if you didn't comment today. And then we also, in 2020, will be updating the model again, this time the major decennial update of the model, and at that point you'll also have time to input on the land use side of things. I also want to mention that we did, as part of this, make some updates to the model network to reflect projects that have been advanced, that it came along sooner than we thought when the model network was last updated about 4 years ago. So we've gotten that as up to date as possible. And we're also coming up with a year 2018 baseline, and that's based on Department of Finance and some other for population and households, and using some commercial data for the jobs numbers. So our goal is to incorporate the land use as it stands today into the model. We then we will start running the model, and we plan to have that done by early fall, and we will be coming back to you and providing you with screen line reports. That's how we kind of show you what the model is doing and can compare it to the P2013 based model. So you can see kind of the screen lines show you the number of traffic volumes crossing certain screen lines around the county. Screen line is basically a line, say, running across Walnut Creek, crossing North Main, 680, all the north-south routes. So you'd see kind of all the traffic running north-south through Walnut Creek. Or we have about 20 screen lines around the county where you can really get a feel for what the model is doing in your area. So we'll come back to you in the fall with that. But today, the goal is to forward this land use data set to our modeling consultant and have them incorporate it into the model. So I can take any questions, comments.
Actually, just a quick thank you for working with us. I know there was a little bit of a technical glitch with the security settings of various cities' email systems. So we appreciate you giving us the time to go through those and do the work.
Sure. Yeah, we were trying to send large files through the email, and it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So, and I appreciate all the comments we did receive from the jurisdictions.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And opposed? All right. That all passed. Thank you, Matt. Other business. Do we have any other business? Seeing none, we'll adjourn to the next meeting, July 19th. And away we go. Pittsburgh. Yep. Yep. I've lived there about 10 years now.
10 years?
Yep. Yep.
Nice little commute for you.
Yep. No, but it's bikeable. I always tell myself I'm going to bike to work. I'm going to do it, but I've never done it. Never done it. It's it's more like 3.5 miles, because I live right at the edge of Pittsburgh and Antioch, up in the foothills. Yeah. So, but anyway, I've never done it.
So you get like an EV vehicle or something.
Yeah.
It's ideal. 3 miles. That's all.
I know. Well, that's just it. It's downhill going to work. So I
put it in neutral.
Right. Of course, going uphill in the summer back home is, but that's sort of it. I wouldn't be sweating when I go to work in the morning.
The electric scooters.
Yeah. That's my speed.
Yeah.
Something that I don't have to pedal.
Or even electric bike. You just
Yeah.
crank it and it's automatic.
Yeah, we had some electric bike. The police department was testing out some electric bikes, so we all got to test ride them around the city hall, and those were really cool. Yeah, they were neat. Oh well. One of these days, stop polluting.
Yeah, you do.
She's trying to recruit you. Oh, is that private? That's a private thing.
Must be a private thing.
No, not a. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't that's probably against Brown Act. Right. Hi, I'm Celestine Doe with Bart.
Oh, nice to meet you. Is it Celeste?
It's Celestine.
Celestine. Okay. Eric.
Eric.
Yeah.
In your home country. Home city.
Actually, this is Walnut Creek.
Oh, right, Walnut Creek. Yeah,
Well,
Hill.
no,
Stop.
the address is Walnut Creek. It's actually unincorporated county. Walnut Creek Spur influence. Pleasant Hill Park.
Yeah, it's
We're very
Okay.
much a
It's confusing.
yeah
It is
cent-
confusing.
central collaborative naming
Especially if
process.
you want to know who to call for a broken traffic signal.
Oh, yeah, my Matt and I had to email Monish because that was like,
Oh, it's called a county traffic signal.
Yeah. But you go, oh, we should call Rahat in Walnut Creek. No.
So the ones on the street is actually Walnut Creek.
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, because they coordinated for the county. These are county, and the ones near the Falcons on
That's California.
yeah. They're probably
Yeah, no, the signal here was like,
2/3 of a mile up the road. You got
we
it.
told people we should go.
But
It was like,
Oh, there is. Oh, yeah.
There's Oak Park.
That's not very.
Oak Park and Oak Park and Pleasant. That's the last one. That's it. But our signal is maintained by the county too. The county signal crew. Yeah, so not the public works department, but their signal.
Right.
Yeah, so the county signal actually maintains signal for Oakley, Pleasant Hill, Martinez, Danville, Dorinda is Dorinda is electric. Danville,
are you guys going to
Alamo,
share meetings for the Township Council? Are you assigned?
Elseville,
Because I know
Pablo,
she's that one person that used to be Nikki. I used to work with Nikki, but she got.
It's actually part of like this conversation.
So are you just kind of helping all of them, or you're going to just like?
Because I'm just used to contacting the city for the timing plans, but the city's only maintains the timing plans. Or have a copy of them.
At least the file. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually the county.
I should just go to the county.
Yeah, you should.
Well, usually what I do is they have to
Usually
open up
it's
the
like
cabinet
this,
and
but then
then
when funding
take
comes
it out
up,
and copy
then it
it.
gets kind of like.
Ideally, if you have a
Anyways, maybe not in the, because usually when we have funding opportunities, like
download
we
it.
often like we do something. I put like a policy or a guideline. Sometimes with
Some of the smaller agencies don't have a single server.
come meetings, everyone's then looking at agencies' interest. But today it was pretty benign. So just
They got the money.
yeah. But when it's like funding,
Well, congratulations, your reign is over.
then the funding is fun. Yeah, they
A lot of canceled meetings.
Then
So
they
like
have, you know.
I know, we had a
they
lot.
want to be.
Did we?
yeah,
They want to voice their concerns, like
last year I think we had.
whereas this kind of stuff is like.